Today on Inside Utah Politics, Super Tuesday. Our state is participating in the mega primary. The state director of elections is here with everything you need to know to make your vote count. Plus, the fight over daylight saving time continues on Utah's Capitol Hill. Will this finally be the year lawmakers agree to put an end to moving the clock back and forth? A look at the bill that could make that happen.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We begin this morning with Justin Lee. He is the state director of elections. He's here to help get us ready for Super Tuesday. Justin, always glad to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about how we got here, because we're used to doing a caucus system, one, and two, later in the process. So give us an idea of how we got here on a primary on Super Tuesday.
Sure. So it's been interesting over the years. If you go back to 2012, we did our regular primary election in June, and we just stuck the presidential primary along with that. So we were late in the process. Nobody really cared about it. The parties changed their rules, so the presidential selection had to be done earlier in the year. And so without changing a primary in 2016, it just kind of fell to the parties to do that on caucus night. There were long lines. There were kind of a lot of complaints about how that went. And so the legislature turned around and said, we want to hold a primary and have the election officials run this, just like we do any other election.
Yeah, and the party chair was right there on the front line saying, please save us from this.
Please do this for us.
Okay, so we changed to a primary for that reason. It's more convenient. You guys obviously have more workers and a better structure set up. But how did we make this move to Super Tuesday?
So last year, the original bill that was, I think, passed in 2017 said we will have a primary, but didn't really set a date. So last year we went to the legislature and said, if we're going to do this, you've got to put a date in there, you've got to tell us when we're going to do it, and you've got to make sure we have the funding for that. And the legislature looked at different options, perhaps moving the June primary to May, or doing some other things, and said, you know what, let's go Super Tuesday as early as we could do it, make ourselves more relevant to the nationwide conversation. Yeah,
we'll be talking about that a little bit more later in our panel as well. Let's talk about how it works. This is a primary election, works just like any other primary. So let's really break this down for Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated voters. How does that work for those three categories?
So the first thing to know is there's two races going on. A lot of people don't know this. There is actually a Republican presidential primary race going on. Some people think that's a foregone conclusion. But there's a Democratic primary as well, which has a lot of candidates on that ballot. It's changing every day depending what goes on.
I was going to say, we should note that you may see some names on there that are no longer in the race.
Absolutely. There are people withdrawing, every other day perhaps
so
from this race. So keep up to date on that. Some of the candidates, interestingly enough, said we're suspending our campaigns, but we're not withdrawing. So leave us on the ballot, but we're just not going to campaign. So people do want to be educated.
Right.
But what they need to know is the Democrats have an open primary. So anybody can have a Democratic ballot, whether you're a Republican, unaffiliated, any other party, you can vote in that Democratic primary. And that's where most people are interested in casting their ballot.
You do have to take a step, though, if you're unaffiliated, right?
If you're unaffiliated, yeah.
And you want to vote in the Democratic primary?
You're going to have to request the ballot.
Okay.
If you're any party, Republican or unaffiliated, you contact your county clerk or go to the polls and say, I want the Democratic ballot, and you will be allowed to vote that ballot. But it will not be mailed to you automatically.
Got it. And if you're Republican, your ballot's automatically going to come to you.
That's right. If you're Republican, you're going to get the Republican ballot in the mail. If you're a Democrat, you're going to get the Democratic ballot in the mail. If you want anything different than that, then you've got to contact your county clerk and let that be known.
Got it. Okay, so you mentioned Democratic open primary, as they always are.
Yep.
Republicans are closed, though. So if you want to vote on the Republican side, there's some steps you have to take.
There are. If you want to vote in the Republican primary and you're an unaffiliated voter, you have to affiliate with the Republican Party to cast that ballot. And at this point, the only way you can do that is going to the polls in person and affiliating as a Republican to cast that ballot.
That's because ballots are already out at this point, and they would have had to, there was a deadline prior to this to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, February 3rd was the deadline if you wanted to change, unless you actually go to the polls and do that. And again, only for unaffiliated voters.
Right.
A Democrat can't change to Republican at this point, but an unaffiliated voter, which a lot of people say is an independent voter if they don't use the term, has to go affiliate.
Okay. How often does this happen? Give us a feel for how many people actually take that step to affiliate with a party to participate in a primary.
We don't have hard numbers to know exactly how many people do it. We do see a little uptick, particularly for the Republican Party. In a June primary, you'll see the Republican numbers go up a little bit. So we know there are unaffiliateds that are affiliating Republican to vote, but we're not seeing it in huge numbers.
Okay. One thing I do want to mention as well, you can theoretically be on the Democratic primary and participate in the Democratic primary on Super Tuesday, and then change your mind and want to participate in the Republican governor's race primary in June, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that.
There's nothing stopping that at all. Once we get past the primary, people can change their affiliation, they can change what ballot they'd like to receive. That goes all the way up until the 1st of June when those decisions have to be made. So yeah, people could switch parties or switch what ballot they want at this point.
Okay. I hear there might be a bill in the future on that one, so we'll have to see how that all plays out.
We'll watch
but for
that.
now, that is the case. Mail-in ballots. Just like any other primary, they've gone out, and this is a primarily mail-in ballot election.
That's right. I mean, we've gone from 2016, that's the other big change, is all counties are primarily by mail at this point. So ballots are out there, voters have those ballots in hand. The big thing they want to know is they can either go turn it in person, counties have a lot of drop boxes where they can turn that in, or if they're going to postmark it, has to be postmarked the day before the election. So March 2nd is when people want to get that postmarked in the mail.
We have really seen a huge impact since we went to mail-in ballots. Talk about how that has helped increase participation in elections here in the state of Utah.
Yeah, there's no question. For smaller elections, primary elections, municipal elections, turnout goes up when we have by-mail elections. We had enough kind of examples over the years where one county wasn't by mail, and then every county that was by mail was higher than the counties that weren't by mail. So there's no question that helps. It's the best reminder we can give somebody. You know, there's an election because you've got a ballot right in front of you.
It just sits on the counter and tell you, open it up and fill it out. You mentioned the postmark deadline. That would be Monday, March 2nd.
That's right.
That would need to be done. If you don't get that, we've had some problems with that in the past, so you really need to be careful in paying attention to that.
You do. I think voters are getting better at it. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but yeah, make sure that's postmarked on March 2nd. And if not, just go take it to the polling location on March 3rd. It's kind of like a fast pass. Just drop it off and go on your way.
Okay. Early voting, open now. Talk about that as an option.
Early voting open now through Friday. Go to vote.utah.gov and you can find out where the locations are in your county, for your area, whatever's closest to you. And go do that. What we don't want to see is a lot of people show up on election day and have long lines. So we've got that early voting option for people. You know, go out there and get it done now.
Have you seen a lot of people taking advantage of that option?
Not a lot yet. During this first week of early voting, we saw a few people turn out, but most of it is people sending their ballots back in at this point.
Got it.
We have about 90% of people who vote by mail. In the last couple of cycles, we've only seen about 1%, maybe 2% of people who are voting in person early and picking up a few more on election day.
Very interesting. And then if it does come down to it, there are election day options as well.
Absolutely. Every county will have vote centers where people can go vote on election day. If there's a problem with the ballot or if they just want to go there and get the sticker, they can do that.
And same day registration also an option
Absolutely.
for Super Tuesday?
Yep, same day registration. So if someone isn't registered, you know, hasn't got a ballot, or if they just have a problem with their registration, go down on election day, you can still vote.
Okay, and I think you've already mentioned this, but you can even affiliate and get the, or not affiliate, but get the Democratic ballot on election day as well?
You can, absolutely. Because it's an open primary, anybody could go in and say, I want that. Now, the one thing people want to know is if they were sent a different ballot, you were sent the Republican ballot and you want it, make sure you take that Republican ballot with you. The county clerk can spoil that one and then get you the ballot you want.
Okay, Justin, always great information. Thanks for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Still to come, because of Super Tuesday, Utah getting a lot of attention from presidential hopefuls. Our panel will weigh in on the impact a little bit later. But first, should churches and other nonprofit organizations have the right to endorse political candidates? Congress considering a bill on that. We'll break it down next. How would you like to stop changing those clocks twice a year? A bill moving forward on Utah's Capitol Hill could make that happen. It's the latest effort in an ongoing battle. Just as sure as we move those clocks forward in the spring and back in the fall, The Utah legislature once again looking to address the contentious issue.
It's been every year I've been here. This is my 10th session. We have had someone elevate the discussion around daylight savings time.
This year it's Senator Wayne Harper elevating that discussion. He's even riding some momentum after his bill overwhelmingly passed the Senate.
There was a survey done in 2017 stating that 74% of the people want to go to daylight savings time year-round. There was a survey that was finished last week that says that 71% of the people in Utah and nationwide want to stop changing the clock.
Under his bill, the state would permanently move to mountain daylight time if Congress approves it and 4 other western states get on board. Harper says he spent a lot of time coming to the right balance with his colleagues.
They've asked us to address a couple issues. We've done those, and now people are saying, you've met what we've asked you for. Let's get this bill passed, and let's not deal with it again.
But he may have some convincing to do in the House as well. Speaker Brad Wilson says his leadership team discussed it on Friday, and he says they are divided.
We have half the group whose runners or spouses are runners, and they want one version, and we have the other half of the group whose kids play baseball at night, and they want another version of daylight savings time. So I'm as interested as you are in terms of how this is going to turn out on the House floor at some point, but we'll see.
The bill passed the Senate on a vote of 25-2. Its first hearing in the House will be in front of the Government Operations Committee. Should nonprofits and churches be allowed to support and endorse political candidates? Right now, under U.S. law, they cannot, but now one congressman from Georgia, a former pastor, wants to change that. But as Washington correspondent Kelly Meyer finds out, the majority of Americans could be against it.
For Georgia Congressman Jody Hice, promoting religious freedom is personal.
Having been a pastor for 25 years plus prior to Congress, I saw firsthand the damaging impact of the Johnson Amendment.
Since 1954, the Johnson Amendment has banned nonprofit organizations and churches from supporting political candidates.
It really threatens and censors what can and cannot be said in the pulpits of America with threat of losing your tax-exempt status.
Hice tells me while he was a pastor, his church's tax-exempt status was threatened after he spoke freely about political candidates in his church. He's now working on a bill to remove that restriction.
I don't think that's wise for our politics or our churches.
Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons works with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative at the Center for American Progress. He fears repealing the Johnson Amendment would make churches more like a political organization than a place of worship.
I go to church to pray, to be in fellowship with my fellow Christians, to center myself, and yes, to hear about issues in the world. I don't go to church to hear political endorsements.
Graves Fitzsimmons says he feels confident the majority of America doesn't want churches endorsing candidates. President Trump has mixed public statements on the topic, but during the State of the Union, he said the country shouldn't, quote, muzzle preachers and pastors, which means if Hice can get the bill passed, the president may support it. Reporting in Washington, I'm Kelly Meyer.
Still to come, presidential hopefuls are stopping in Utah ahead of Super Tuesday. Our panel weighs in on the presidential primary after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now for a closer look at some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Utah Democratic Party Chair Peter Kroon and former Utah GOP Chair Rob Anderson. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Let's start off with Super Tuesday. Some pretty exciting times for the state of Utah. We have candidates coming here trying to win over Utah votes. This is new for us this time around. So let's get into that first. Peter, let's start with you. What's your assessment of what you're seeing in the Democratic field as we head to Super Tuesday?
Well, so overall nationwide, I think it's still a pretty open race. I think anybody could emerge. I mean, we see Bernie Sanders sort of taking the lead with Pete Buttigieg, but I think there's other candidates out there that are coming on strong. I'm a Bloomberg supporter and co-chair of his campaign here in Utah, so we'll see what happens there. He's had a few issues in the race over the last couple of weeks, but I think anything can happen. I think in Utah last time I think was the second highest Bernie Sanders supporting state in the nation. So when the right goes right in Utah, the left goes left, and we were a big Bernie state, and so we'll see what I think that may be the case again this year, but we'll see.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit, but let's bring you in, Rob. As a Republican, and you're kind of watching what's happening on the Democratic side, what are you watching for here?
Well, I think those candidates coming in energize the Democratic base, and that base is the far left base, which is it's a minority in the state. You got to realize that the fastest growing party is the unaffiliated voters. So you've got the Republicans 3-1 over the Democrats, and you've got the unaffiliated base. And so they're energizing their base. They're trying to capture some energy there, maybe sway some of the unaffiliated voters their direction. And that's not a bad tactic. You see a lot of that, and I think it's great for the state to be more involved in politics in either way. So
yeah, let's talk more about that. Mayor Pete came during the week. Bloomberg came during the week as well. What about that? What about Utah being on the map and being more in the mix this time around?
I think it's great. I mean, it's nice because usually, as we say, we've been a flyover state. Seems like that's changing now over the last few years, and it's great to see candidates coming here because traditionally Republican or Democrat, they didn't need to come. Now it seems like they need to come here. And I'm also excited that we're having a primary this year. Last time we had a caucus, and for the Democrats, that was a real mess. That's when I was chair of the Utah Democratic Party, and it was a little bit of an Iowa situation that we had. So the primary is a lot cleaner way to go, and we appreciate the support of the state in holding the primaries.
The Democratic side, obviously still up for grabs, not on the Republican side. So
right.
As a Republican and you look at that, are you still liking the attention you're seeing Utah get from this?
I don't mind it at all. In fact, I lobbied for the presidential primary, the state running that, because the individual parties, we saw what happened in Iowa. That's a microcosm of the funding that state parties have, and they can't go out there and afford to do a clean election like the state's built to do. So I was happy that the state did that. It puts us on the map in Super Tuesday. It gets more people involved in politics, and I've always said more people gets you a better result in the end. So I want everybody to be involved this year.
What candidate well, I mean, you're chairing Bloomberg, so that kind of answers that question for me, but do you believe he is best equipped out of all the Democratic field to take on President Trump? And is that the ultimate goal that you are looking for as a Utah Democrat?
Not everybody's excited about the billionaire versus the billionaire, but as with Donald Trump, when you have that much money, you don't have to be beholden to others. So I think that is a good thing with Michael Bloomberg. He also has run a big city, New York City, so he's been in politics. He's not new to the game. And I think he's a candidate who really can take on Donald Trump, and he's not going to put up with his nonsense. And but I think any of the candidates would be a good rival to Donald Trump, and I think they'll all give him a run for his money.
All the same compared to the other? Or would more be more equipped for that?
Well, I think those with more experience who have been in politics, I think, are better equipped to some of those political attacks that you see. They're already starting within the Democratic field, and Donald Trump's already taking a few shots at the Democrats. So I think those who have been in politics understand it a little bit better than those who are maybe new to the game.
Rob, President Trump's going to win the primary in Utah. He struggled in 2016, didn't win the primary, and even in the general election, didn't perform as you would expect a Republican to in the state. Right. Do you think this time around, because there are other candidates on the ballot still, maybe 5 or 6, I can't remember the exact number, most notably Bill Weld, former Massachusetts governor. Are you expecting to see some protest votes against the president in the Republican primary?
Yeah, but not as many as we saw back in 16. I think he takes 80% plus of the vote in the primary, and I think in the end, in November, we'll see a 60-65% vote in Utah for President Trump.
So
which always surprises me. I mean, we talk about being the family values state, and then we vote for somebody who really has very few values.
Talk about that.
And juxtapose that with a booming economy and all those things, all those indicators that people are aware of. Unemployment down.
That's what frustrates me. We're willing to look past a person's personal values, and life is good for me, so I'm going to look past what I consider my values and vote for somebody who like Donald Trump.
Right, which is what most of the people who are against Trump, they go after a character attack. We didn't elect a moral man always. I mean, if you go look back at the history of our presidents, there's some amoral practices going on in the People's House and the White House, and some things that have occurred over time. And so, I think a lot of people are willing to overlook that for substance and results. Let's go back to the economy, Jerusalem. The things that are going on, America great in the world again. Those kind of things, trade practices being, those things will overwhelm.
Yeah, historically, we have seen when the economy's good, an incumbent president tends to fare pretty well. We'll see how this all plays out. It's going to be fascinating as it moves down the line. Let's move on to another subject, surprisingly contentious year after year, is daylight saving time. We have a proposal that overwhelmingly passed the Senate to move Utah permanently to mountain daylight time, so lighter later in the day, but kind of facing some divide in the House. First off, your thoughts on daylight saving. Before we get into why it's so contentious all the time, does something need to happen here?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like we're chasing an issue that's really not that significant. I get up at 5 a.m. during the week and maybe 6, 7 during the weekend, so it's often dark when I get up anyway. But the idea of having it not get light in the winter till about 9 o'clock, that could be a little bit tough on people trying to get up and get to work.
Your thoughts, Rob?
Well, saving time goes from March to November, right, which is the majority of the year. So, for that small portion where they move the clock back to standard time, I don't know that it affects us that much. I think people, if anything, don't want to change the clock, first of all. And if they do at the end, I mean, I think we're happy with what we are, because you're going to lose an hour in the spring and gain an hour in the fall. So, it died before, it's probably going to die on the vine again.
Yeah, well, that's when we really hate it, is when we lose that hour of sleep, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of consensus, so to get rid of it, there's just so much question about the right way to go, and that's why we tend to see it, it's such a controversial issue year after year. I want to move to another subject real quick. Congressman from Georgia looking to repeal the Johnson Amendment. That is the amendment that forbids churches from endorsing political candidates. Is it time to do that? Your thoughts?
No. I've been involved with nonprofits, involved with my own church. I think churches need to stay out of campaigns. Doesn't mean they can't advocate for policies that are important to them. They can do it up at the legislature, but I think it's a bad idea to have nonprofits and churches involved in politics.
All right, your thoughts on that, Rob?
Gosh, I think the overarching thing here is the First Amendment rights of free speech and those kind of things. Should it apply to a church? I don't think, regardless of whatever would occur there, I don't think the majority of religion in Utah would do that. I think they're happy with teaching correct principles in the church place, but politics and religion are like oil and water. They're hard to mix, and generally speaking, you create a lot of division within your religion to do that.
You mentioned that you're okay with them backing ideas and proposals and whatnot, and we do see that. You belong to the LDS Church, you belong to the Catholic Church, both of which are very active in the state of Utah. You're okay with that? Them involving in issues. Why is that?
Because, as Rob mentioned, freedom of speech, and those are issues that are important to the church. So they should be able to talk about those issues and go up to the Capitol. But when it gets involved in backing certain candidates, then I think it gets very contentious within the nonprofit or the religion, and then you're dividing your own house by doing that. So I think it's just a bad idea for the nonprofits and the religions, because I think it can only hurt their own institutions.
All right, Rob, I'll give you the last 20 seconds.
I think if we're looking at the South, the Bible Belt, I think the pastors down there for years have endorsed candidates within their congregation. I don't know that is a violation of the Johnson Amendment, as it were, but it occurs on a smaller scale.
Okay.
And in Utah, as the former Democratic chair, I'd hear from Democrats who say they'd go to church and be told that they shouldn't be voting for Democrats, and so it happens here in Utah, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Probably more vote for Democrats based on that.
A lot of emotion behind that as well. Gentlemen, glad to have you with us. Great conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Another reminder, Super Tuesday coming up quick. The multi-state primary is Tuesday, March 3rd. The final day of the 2020 legislative session is Thursday, March 12th. Republican and Democratic state conventions are Saturday, April 25th, and then the state primary election is Tuesday, June 30th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.